After staying out late entertaining clients, I was 10 minutes late the next morning, and my colleague wanted me fired. My name is Noah Carter. After 10 years of never being late, not once this was the morning the clock betrayed me. 10 minutes, that was all. 10 minutes late after a night spent closing one of the biggest deals our department had seen in months. But those 10 minutes would become the weapon my colleague Olivia used to try and destroy me. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The night before had been one of those long-haul client entertainments where charm, patience, and a little alcohol were all part of the negotiation toolkit. My job as business development manager meant I lived in the blurred space between business and relationship deals. Weren't just signed on paper, they were signed over dinners, jokes, and midnight coffees. This particular dinner had gone exceptionally well. The client, a regional shipping mogul with a reputation for being hard to please, had finally given me a verbal yes. It wasn't ink yet, but I could feel it. The years of nurturing this contact were about to pay off. We wrapped at close to midnight, and because they were in town only for the night, I agreed to a quick nightcap at their hotel bar. By the time I got into a cab, it was pushing 1:30 a.m. I set my alarm as soon as I got home, careful to double-check it. I wasn't worried. I could run on 4 hours of sleep if I had to. But when morning came, my body betrayed me just long enough to turn my usual 8:50 a.m. desk arrival into a 9:00 a.m. door entry. The moment I stepped into the office, I saw her, Olivia, leaning against the reception desk with that poised, almost feline stillness she used when she was about to pounce. "Cutting it close, aren't we?" she said, her voice light but carrying. It was the kind of remark designed to be overheard. And it was. A few heads turned. I didn't bite. "Client dinner ran long," I said evenly, heading for my office, but I caught the way her eyes narrowed. Olivia wasn't just making conversation, she was clocking this moment like a hawk, noting a mouse's stumble. Olivia and I weren't enemies exactly. We'd had a cordial enough working relationship on the surface, but I'd always felt the undercurrent. She was competitive in a way that wasn't about excellence, but about elimination. The kind of colleague who didn't just want to win, she wanted you out of the race entirely. I brushed it off at first. Everyone's allowed a smirk over a coworker's slip, but an hour later I learned it was more than that. Our team's group chat pinged with an email notification from Olivia R. to team, all subject friendly reminder, punctuality matters. "Good morning, team. Just a quick reminder to be at our desks and ready to work by our official start time of 8:50 a.m. A culture of punctuality reflects our professionalism to both clients and each other." She might as well have typed my name in red ink. The subtext was clear. Still, I had other things to focus on. My priority was prepping the final proposal for the client we'd courted for months. The meeting was set for the following week, and this contract would solidify our market position in 3 major cities. I had detailed notes from the dinner, including an offhand comment from the client about wanting to integrate our tracking tech into their fleet. That was gold intel that could tip negotiations in our favor. But as I was fine-tuning the numbers, I caught another ripple. Mid-morning, I passed the HR office and heard my name. "Chronic lateness. 3 separate concerns," a voice said. My blood went cold. Chronic 3 separate concerns. I'd been late exactly once in years. When I stepped into my own office, my phone buzzed a calendar reminder. Not one I'd set. Performance discussion, next Friday, HR and management. I hadn't been told about this. I hadn't even been consulted. That's when it hit me. Olivia wasn't just making noise. She was building a case. And if she was already involving HR, she was confident enough to think she could win. I've learned in business that the first rule when someone comes for you is not to flinch. The second is to start keeping records. Every meeting, every email, every handshake documentation becomes your armor. I opened a private folder on my personal cloud drive and dropped in the taxi receipt from the night before the time-stamped email I'd sent the client at 1:18 a.m. and the text thread where they thanked me for the evening and hinted at signing next week. Olivia thought she had a neat little narrative, unreliable, late, possibly sloppy. But I knew something she didn't. Truth has a way of leaving fingerprints. That morning, I didn't confront her. I didn't even change my tone when I passed her in the hall. But inside, I was already playing a longer game. She had fired the first shot. I was going to make sure she never saw the counterstrike coming. And it all started with those 10 minutes. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, not because I was suddenly obsessed with being on time, but because I wanted to watch how people looked at me. In an office like ours, reputation is currency. Once a rumor starts to circulate, it works like a slow-acting poison. People smile at you the same way, but their eyes start calculating differently, filing you under risk. I walked in at 8:35 a.m., coffee in hand, and headed for my desk. From the corner of my eye, I saw Olivia already at hers, perfectly poised with her hair sleek, makeup fresh, and a small, satisfied smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't look up as I passed, but I could feel it. She knew I knew. For the first half hour, I buried myself in emails, making small talk with a few early birds. But at exactly 9:02 a.m., the team inbox chimed, an all-staff email from Olivia. From Olivia R. to team all subject accountability and team standards. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take a moment to reiterate the importance of punctuality and readiness. Even a small delay in the morning can cause missed opportunities and sends the wrong message to our clients. Let's all recommit to our shared professional values. On its face, it was generic, corporate fluff, but the timing perfectly calculated. The previous day's events were still fresh in everyone's minds. She was placing me at the center of that sentence without ever saying my name, letting imagination do the rest. Across the room, I noticed two junior analysts exchange a glance. One of them smirked faintly. In the break room later, I caught fragments of conversation, my name spoken low, followed by just what I heard. It's never the volume of the rumor that matters, only its persistence. A small seed dropped in enough ears will sprout into fact before you've had the chance to defend yourself. By lunchtime, I was certain this wasn't a one-off dig. My buddy in IT, an old ally from a late-night system crash we'd fixed together years ago, sent me a discreet message. Heads up, someone's been poking around your account logs. I called him immediately, poking around how calendar timestamps access records. Twice yesterday afternoon and once this morning. Administrative credentials, not your own login. Can't say more without tripping alerts, but it's not standard. That was all I needed to hear. My instincts were screaming. Olivia wasn't just gossiping, she was building a paper trail against me. I opened my company calendar to check something and froze. The dinner with Hartwell Logistics, the one that had been scheduled weeks ago and approved by our director, was gone. The entire event had vanished as if it had never been there. My first reaction was disbelief. This wasn't just petty. This was deliberate. If that dinner didn't exist on record, then my late arrival the next morning looked like negligence, not the result of legitimate business obligations. And without proof, my defense would sound like an excuse. I called IT again this time, using a tone that said log this as an official inquiry. Can you tell me when the event was deleted from my calendar? A pause, then the faint clicking of keys. Modification logged at 2:11 a.m. from an office workstation. Not your laptop, not your phone. Device name matches one of the shared terminals in the 14th floor conference suite. I was in a cab at 2:11 a.m. I had the receipt, the GPS log, even the text to the client thanking them for the meeting. But hearing that time, I remembered something odd. The night before, when I'd swung by the office to grab my presentation folder before the dinner, I'd noticed a faint light down the hall from my floor, the 14th floor conference suite. At the time, I hadn't thought anything of it. People worked late often here. But now the image was burned into my brain, the frosted glass glowing softly, the silhouette of someone moving inside. It was circumstantial, but it was enough for my gut to click into certainty. Olivia had been in the office that night. That afternoon, she came to me. She leaned casually against my doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame, as if she owned the air I was breathing. Big meeting with Hartwell coming up. She began, her voice sugar-coated but firm underneath. I've been thinking maybe I should handle it, given recent concerns. Her words hung there like smoke. I met her gaze, concerns. Her eyes sparkled like she was savoring the moment. You know, optics matter, clients notice things, and I'd hate for a small lapse to overshadow all the work you've done. Best to keep things clean. It was elegant, really. In one breath, she framed herself as protecting the company, while positioning me as a liability. If I agreed, I'd hand her the account and the credit. If I pushed back, I'd look defensive, even paranoid. I smiled faintly. Noted. What I didn't tell her was that I'd already begun building my own case. That morning, I'd started a separate locked timeline file, a forensic map of every detail from the past 48 hours. Dinner reservation confirmations, client text exchanges, screenshots of my original calendar entry, the taxi ride logged down to the minute. I'd even recorded a voice memo recounting the night while it was fresh in my mind. Every piece was a puzzle fragment, and soon I'd have a picture no one could dispute. Olivia's problem was that she thought I operated on instinct alone. What she didn't understand was that I'm a patient man. I'll let someone believe they've cornered me just to watch them step into their own trap. By the end of the day, I had 2 separate backups of my timeline, one on an encrypted cloud drive, one on a flash drive tucked in my briefcase. I locked my office, shut down my computer, and walked past Olivia without a glance. She thought she'd set the tone of the story. She had no idea I was about to rewrite the ending. By the next morning, I'd shifted from defense to reconnaissance. If Olivia was building her case through whispers and selective evidence, then I'd counter by collecting the kind of proof that doesn't just clear your name, it flips the whole board. I arrived early again, just before 8:30 a.m., and this time I wasn't here to make a point about punctuality. I wanted to see who was in where they were sitting, what was on their screens, the little details that tell you who's busy and who's orchestrating something behind the scenes. Olivia was in early too. She always was when she was angling for something. Her hair was perfect, her blazer sharp, her desk immaculate except for one small telling thing. A stack of client folders for Hartwell Logistics sat neatly on the corner. She wasn't even hiding her intentions anymore. I settled into my chair, fired up my computer, and pulled up my private timeline file. Over the last 2 days, I'd been layering it with dated dinner reservation confirmations from the restaurant, the signed bill showing the client's name, a time-stamped photo of us at the table that the client had texted me as a joke. I also added the digital receipt from the hotel bar, the cab company's GPS log, and the screenshot of my phone's map tracking the ride home. The beauty of modern life is that everything leaves a trail. Even if Olivia tried to rewrite my schedule, she couldn't erase the digital fingerprints of where I'd been. Mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the client himself, Hammindu Morning Noah, still thinking about that tracking integration. Let's put it in the draft contract. Gold. Pure gold. I saved the screenshot instantly. The integration idea was mine. It hadn't even been in our original pitch. If it showed up in the contract, the origin would be indisputable. Still, something nagged at me. The deleted calendar event wasn't just an attack, it was a preemptive move. Olivia must have known I'd reference it if questioned. She wasn't improvising. She was clearing the path for something bigger. At lunch, I invited my IT friend for a quick coffee run. Outside, away from the office ears, I asked, "Can you trace who accessed my calendar that night?" "Exactly." He hesitated. "Technically, I'm not supposed to give you specifics without a formal request from management." I held up my coffee as if making a toast. "Technically, I didn't ask for specifics, but if someone were to confirm a hunch of mine, I'd know how to proceed." He sighed. "Let's just say the device that accessed your calendar at 2:11 a.m., same one Olivia used for a deck review the next morning. And Noah, she didn't just delete your event, she opened 2 of your other client folders. That's all I can say. That was enough. She was going for more than Hartwell. She was angling to position herself as the star player by pushing me out of multiple accounts." By mid-afternoon, the pieces started clicking into place. I'd overheard a snippet in the hall, Olivia talking to our director, her tone sweetly concerned. "It's not that Noah isn't talented, but I just worry about reliability. Clients sense these things." I kept my head down, working, documenting. Every time my phone lit up with a client message, I saved it. Every internal file I touched, I noted the time. The record was building itself. The real test came at 4:15 p.m. when an email from HR landed in my inbox from HR Department Subject Performance Review meeting. "Noah, please join us next Friday at 11:00 a.m. for a discussion regarding recent performance observations. Management will be present." Observations. Such a polite word for an ambush. I closed the email and sat back. Olivia was confident, too confident, which meant she thought her version of the story was airtight. That night at home, I printed hard copies of everything: texts, receipts, screenshots, logs. I even printed the restaurant's publicly available reservation list that still had my name in the 8:00 p.m. slot. I laid them out on my kitchen table like evidence in a court case. The more I looked at it, the calmer I felt. Because here's the thing about people like Olivia, they're so busy cutting throats quietly that they forget some of us sharpen our knives in the open. I knew now that this wasn't about one late morning. This was about territory, ambition, and erasure. She wanted my seat at the table, my accounts, my reputation, and she was willing to risk everything to get it. Fine. If she wanted a war, I'd make sure it ended with her writing her own resignation letter. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The missing calendar entry gnawed at me like a splinter under the skin. Not because I needed it to prove where I was that I could do a dozen other ways, but because of what it represented. Somebody had gone out of their way to erase an official record of my work. That wasn't carelessness, it was intent, and intent meant motive. I didn't want to go directly at Olivia yet. A direct confrontation would alert her that I was onto her. Instead, I started working through back channels. First stop the night security guard. I made it seem casual bumping into him on my way out that evening. Rough week, I said, pulling my coat tighter. Late nights for everyone, I guess. He shrugged. Yeah, saw a couple folks burning the midnight oil this week. You obviously, and Olivia too. Tuesday night, I think. Tuesday night, the night of the Hartwell dinner. I tilted my head like I was only mildly interested. Really? Thought she left early that day. He shook his head. Nah, she came back after 10. Went up to the conference level. Didn't leave until maybe 2:30. I remember because I thought it was odd no meeting scheduled that late. That little nod of confirmation settled deep in my gut. I kept my tone neutral. Guess the big projects are keeping everyone busy. Then I walked out into the cool night air, knowing I had just gotten my first external witness. The next morning, I came in earlier than her just to test a theory. On her desk, neat as ever, sat her laptop dock and a closed leather folder. I couldn't open it, of course, but I didn't need to. A small post-it note stuck to the folder read, Hartwell, Reverend 3 internal only. Internal only, meaning whatever was in there she hadn't planned to share with me. I spent most of that day assembling the next layer of my record, not just where I'd been or what I'd done, but the sequence of digital events, the time my reservation was confirmed, the moment the cab GPS recorded my pickup, the 1:18 a.m. email to the client, the 2:11 a.m. deletion from my calendar. When laid out in a visual timeline, the contrast was damning. Mid-afternoon, I accidentally walked into a conversation in the break room. Olivia was talking to one of the VPs, her tone low and confidential. Just think we need to be proactive. If there's a pattern, we can't let it get to the client stage. The VP nodded, looking serious. We'll review before the meeting next week. She glanced up, saw me, and pasted on a bright smile. Noah, just talking about next quarter's client allocation. Sounds like an important conversation, I said evenly, pouring myself coffee. I didn't stay long, just enough to plant the idea that I knew she was maneuvering. That evening, I reached out to my contact in compliance. We'd worked together during a messy procurement audit the year before, and I knew he respected people who came to him with facts rather than suspicions. I need a favor, I told him. I think someone altered my official calendar without authorization. Can you confirm the device history if I give you the exact event ID? He hesitated, then said, If you have an ID, I can pull the log without raising flags. I gave him what he needed. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message. Change originated from device ID, Rigger 4262. That's registered to Olivia's laptop dock. There it was hard digital proof. The next day, Olivia tried to move the ball further. She stopped by my office with that infuriatingly calm demeanor. Listen, she began. I've been thinking about Hartwell. With everything going on, maybe I should take point on the signing meeting. Less risk. You know, I let her talk, let her paint her perfect picture of concern for the company, for the optics for the client. When she was done, I simply said, we'll see what management says. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. She'd expected me to push back harder, to give her something she could use. Instead, I'd given her nothing but a polite wall. Meanwhile, my evidence folder was growing. I now had the deleted calendar proof from compliance, the security guard's statement about seeing her that night, my own receipts, texts, and GPS logs, client messages tying me directly to the key proposal elements. I didn't just have enough to clear my name. I had enough to ask very pointed questions about why one of our senior account managers was tampering with company records. And still, I waited, because timing is everything in a takedown. If I moved too soon, she'd spin it as paranoia. But if I moved at the right moment, ideally in front of the right people, I could make sure there was no recovery. Friday afternoon, an all-team meeting was scheduled to review upcoming client signings. Hartwell was on the agenda. Olivia was set to present. I sat quietly listening as she glossed over our progress, conveniently omitting that the verbal agreement had been secured during the dinner I'd attended. When she finished, the VP asked Noah anything to add. I leaned forward, hands clasped. Actually, yes. I think it might be helpful to clarify the sequence of events that led to Hartwell's agreement, since some of the details seem to have gone missing. Olivia's head whipped toward me. Missing? She repeated, voice tightening. Yes, I said, calmly sliding a printed timeline across the table to the VP. For example, the dinner on Tuesday evening, which was removed from my calendar at 2:11 a.m. that night, from Olivia's registered device. The silence was instant and heavy. Olivia's face froze. The VP's brows furrowed as he glanced at the document. I have all the supporting documentation. I continued. Receipts, GPS logs, client correspondence. I'm happy to provide it to compliance and HR for review. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, the VP said, we'll discuss this offline. But I knew as I gathered my papers that the game had shifted. Olivia wasn't hunting me anymore. She was suddenly very aware that she was the one being watched. The meeting ended in a way I'd anticipated but still savored. No dramatic outbursts, no shouting, just that quiet, uncomfortable stillness. That means the power in the room has shifted. Olivia had walked into that conference believing she was steering the narrative. She walked out knowing she no longer controlled it. I didn't look at her when we filed out. I didn't need to. The heat coming off her was palpable the way a campfire burns hotter when you try to smother it. She kept her eyes forward, her smile fixed, but her jaw. I saw the tightness there. Back at my desk, I opened my email, half expecting an HR meeting request within the hour. Instead, I got something better. A message from the VP. Subject follow-up on Hartwell. Matter. Noah, please prepare your full documentation and send it to me in HR by Monday morning. Keep this between us for now. It was exactly the opening I'd been waiting for. She thought she'd be the one bringing evidence to HR. Now I was the one officially requested to submit it. And because the VP had told me to keep it quiet, Olivia wouldn't know I was about to put the nail in the coffin until it was too late. Still, I didn't relax. People like Olivia don't go down without scrambling, and desperation makes them dangerous. Sure enough, within an hour, she appeared at my door, leaning casually against the frame like she had a right to be there. Hey, she said lightly. You kinda blindsided me in there. I just wanted the facts to be clear, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She tilted her head. Look, maybe we just got wires crossed. If something got deleted from your calendar, I'm sure it was some kind of system error. A system error, I repeated, that originated from your registered device. Her eyes flickered just for a second before she recovered. We all use shared workstations sometimes, you know how it is. I gave her a slow nod. Of course. She lingered another moment, as if she was going to say more, then left. But the fact that she'd come at all told me everything she was fishing, trying to gauge how much I had. That weekend I didn't rest. I refined my timeline, tightening it into a concise, irrefutable chain of events. 6:45 p.m. Left office to meet client for scheduled dinner. Calendar entry still visible. 8:00 p.m. Restaurant reservation confirmed by name and time. 11:52 p.m. Receipt for hotel bar drinks with client signature. 1:18 a.m. Email sent to client with updated proposal notes. 2:11 a.m. Calendar entry deleted from my account via Olivia's registered device. 2:28 a.m. Security guard logs Olivia leaving building from conference floor. 9:00 a.m. Arrival at office. Olivia comments publicly on my lateness. I backed everything up again, 3 different drives, 1 physical copy in a sealed envelope in my home safe. I wasn't going to lose this to an accidental file corruption. Monday morning, I sent the packet to the VP and HR with a brief professional cover note. Please find and close the requested documentation regarding the Hartwell account and related calendar modifications. The VP responded within minutes received. This will be reviewed immediately. For the rest of the morning, the air in the office was thick. Olivia kept to her desk, tapping away at her keyboard with exaggerated focus. Every now and then, I'd catch her glancing at the VP's office like she was waiting for a signal. She didn't get one. By midday, HR sent me a calendar invite, this time clearly marked as a joint meeting with the VP and compliance. Olivia was not on the invite. That told me the review had already begun. When the meeting came, I walked in calm. The VP gestured for me to sit. HR had a notepad, and compliance had a laptop open with my packet on screen. This is thorough compliance, said after a moment, and the timestamps align with our internal logs. The VP folded his hands. Noah, I want you to know we take tampering with official records very seriously. We'll be handling this at the highest level. I simply nodded. I appreciate that. My priority is the client relationship and the integrity of our process. That last line wasn't just corporate speak, it was a deliberate reminder that I was still doing my job, still focused on results. If Olivia wanted to paint me as unreliable, this was the antidote. The meeting ended with a promise of follow-up within the week. I knew what that meant. Olivia's leash had just gotten a lot shorter. Back at my desk, I found her waiting. They pulled me into HR, she said flatly. I leaned back in my chair. Oh, they said they had questions about my device logs. I told them it must have been a shared terminal, but she trailed off, studying me. You really want to do this? I met her gaze without blinking. I want the truth on record. Her jaw worked for a second before she forced a smile. All right, let's see where this goes. I knew exactly where it was going, because the thing about traps is once someone steps into them, all you have to do is hold the rope. By Tuesday morning, the shift was impossible to miss. Olivia's desk, once the buzzing hub for half the office's gossip and strategic positioning, was quieter than I'd ever seen it. The constant parade of visitors had thinned to nothing, and her phone, which usually rang every half hour with someone just checking in, sat silent. The VP came in later than usual, bypassed her desk entirely, and went straight into his office. 10 minutes later, my email pinged with a calendar update: Hartwell Logistics, final contract review, location VP's office, attendees VP compliance me. Olivia's name wasn't there. I stared at it for a moment, letting the absence sink in. This was my account, my client, the meeting I'd fought for, and now it was clear management was moving forward without her. Still, I played it cool. At 10 a.m., I walked into the VP's office with my laptop, every note from the Hartwell project neatly organized. The client's final requests were minor delivery timeline adjustments, a small pricing concession that still kept our margin healthy. The VP nodded as I walked him through it. Good work, Noah. They're signing tomorrow. Yes, I said, and I'll be there in person. He gave a faint smile. Good. We want consistency on this one. Consistency. That was the polite corporate way of saying we don't want anyone else touching this. When I left his office, Olivia was at her desk pretending to be buried in spreadsheets, but her eyes flicked up as I passed. I caught the quick flare of something anger, maybe panic, before she looked back down. Later that afternoon, the first real crack appeared. I overheard her in the hallway speaking to someone from another department. I don't understand why I'm being pulled from Hartwell. I've worked just as hard on it as Noah. She stopped abruptly when she realized I was walking by. Her lips pressed together in a thin line. She was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. That night, I decided it was time to close the loop with the client. I called their operations director, a straight shooter who'd been at the dinner. We talked through the final details, and then almost casually I said, I heard there might have been some confusion about who's leading the account. There was a pause, then a chuckle. Confusion? Noah, you're the only one we've dealt with. Olivia called me last week to reassure me she'd be handling things going forward, but I told her directly we were happy with you. Did she not mention that? No, I said evenly. She didn't. Well, he said I figured she was just covering internal bases. Anyway, see you tomorrow for the signing. I thanked him, hung up, and sat back in my chair. The client had shut her out themselves, and she hadn't breathed a word. That was telling. She wasn't just trying to take my credit. She was trying to rewrite the relationship entirely. The next morning, I arrived at the client's office early. I brought the final contract, the integration proposal, and a quiet confidence that only comes when you know the other side has already lost. The signing went smoothly. The client shook my hand warmly and even asked if I'd be free for a celebratory dinner next month. When I got back to the office with the signed contract, the VP called me in. Congrats, he said, handing me a copy of the deal. This was a big win for us. You'll be getting the commission, of course. Thank you, I said, but I knew what was coming next. We'll be making some adjustments in account assignments, he continued. Olivia will be focusing on internal projects for the foreseeable future. Internal projects. That's a corporate exile, no client-facing work, no commissions, no glory. When I left his office, Olivia was standing near the copier. Our eyes met. She smiled, tight, brittle. Congrats on Hartwell, she said. Thanks, I replied. It's good to have everything on record. Her smile faltered. She turned back to the copier without another word. I didn't need to gloat. The victory wasn't just in the deal, it was in knowing that every step she'd taken to undermine me had been documented, traced, and turned back on her. By the end of the week, word had spread. No one said outright what had happened, but in offices like ours, people can read the silences. Olivia kept her head down, her once loud presence reduced to quiet typing in a corner. The knife she'd tried to use on me was now hanging over her, and the best part, I didn't even have to twist it. I just let her sharpen it herself. By Monday morning, the Hartwell win was already making the rounds in the company newsletter, my name front and center in the major contracts secured section. It was the kind of recognition you don't get often, and I knew Olivia would have seen it before she even walked into the office. I almost expected her to keep her distance. Instead, she made her move before I'd even finished my first coffee. She appeared in my doorway, leaning against the frame like she owned the place. "Morning." "Noah," she said, her voice syrupy but with a sharp undertone. "I hear you're on a roll. Thought maybe you could help me with something." I looked up slowly. "Help you?" "Yes," she said, stepping inside uninvited. "I'm leading the Baxter account pitch this Friday. Big potential. But," she gave a small shrug, "I could use your insight. You have a way of reading clients. If you joined me for the meeting, I think it would seal the deal." Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. I knew exactly what she was doing. The Baxter account was one of the few big opportunities left on the table for Q4. If she could get me in the room and then frame herself as the closer, she might claw back some credibility. I set my coffee down. "Isn't Baxter under Mark's portfolio?" She hesitated just enough for me to catch it before saying, "Well, yes, technically. But I've been in touch with them. Mark's happy to let me take point if I bring in backup." It was almost admirable, this mix of shamelessness and opportunism, but I wasn't about to step into her setup. "Sorry, Olivia," I said evenly. "Friday's booked solid for me." Her smile tightened. "That's a shame. I think Baxter would have appreciated your perspective." I let the silence stretch until she left, but the exchange told me one thing: she wasn't done. Losing Hartwell had hurt her, but she still believed she could maneuver her way back into favor. That afternoon, I had confirmation of just how far she'd go. Mark stopped by my desk, closing the door behind him. "Got a weird call from Baxter today," he said. "They wanted to confirm I'd be attending Friday's meeting. Said Olivia told them I was delegating to her, and..." "You?" I raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "Yeah, thing is, I never agreed to that. And I didn't invite you because I knew you were swamped." He frowned. "She's trying to run something, Noah. Just watch yourself." I thanked him and made a mental note Olivia was overplaying her hand. She'd tried to use my name as leverage without my consent, and now there was a witness who could back that up. By Wednesday, I decided to set the stage. I reached out to compliance again, casually asking if Baxter had been added to Olivia's account assignments in the official system. The answer came back within the hour. No. "The account is still under Mark Thompson's portfolio." "Perfect." On Thursday, I ran into the VP in the hallway. I kept my tone casual. "Just so you're aware, I won't be at the Baxter pitch tomorrow. Olivia's been telling people otherwise." The VP's expression sharpened. "She's what I think she's trying to reposition herself on the account," I said. "But Mark hasn't delegated it to her, and I've got the documentation to prove Baxter isn't in her portfolio." His jaw tightened. "Thanks for telling me. I'll look into it." I didn't have to look hard to see the fallout. Friday morning, 20 minutes before the Baxter meeting, Olivia's voice carried down the hall, low, hurried, and edged with panic. "What do you mean I'm not on the agenda? I've been prepping for this all week." Mark's calm reply floated back. "You weren't assigned to this account, Olivia, and after the confusion you caused with Hartwell management, doesn't want overlap. Please step aside." I caught a glimpse of her as she walked away. Face pale, lips pressed so tight they were almost white. She didn't look at me as she passed. By the time the Baxter pitch wrapped successfully under Mark's lead, the whispers had started again. This time, they weren't about me. They were about her, how she'd been removed from 2 major opportunities in as many weeks. How she was suddenly excluded from high-profile meetings. The knife she'd sharpened for me was now hanging over her own head, and everyone could see it, and I hadn't lifted a finger in that final moment. I just made sure the right people saw the truth before she could spin it. By the following Monday, the air in the office felt different. It wasn't just that Olivia was quieter than I'd ever seen her. It was that the subtle energy she used to command was gone. The little flock of junior analysts who used to linger around her desk had dispersed. The steady click of her heels down the hallway was replaced by a hesitant shuffle, but I knew better than to assume she'd surrendered. People like Olivia don't go quietly. They may lick their wounds for a few days, but they're always searching for the next opening, the next angle. And then she found one, or so she thought. It came through Hartwell Logistics, the very client who had secured my position and closed the door on her first major grab for control. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was halfway through reviewing quarterly projections when my phone rang. The caller ID read Daniel Price, Hartwell Operations Director. I answered warmly. "Daniel, good to hear from you. How's the rollout going?" "Smooth as silk," he said. "Your team's been on point. That tracking integration idea you pitched. Already making waves with our regional managers." I smiled, but before I could respond, his tone shifted. "Actually, Noah, there's something I thought you should know. Olivia reached out to us this morning." I leaned back in my chair, instantly alert. "Oh yeah." He continued, sounding faintly amused. "Said she was just checking in and wanted to know if we'd prefer her as our primary point of contact going forward. Claimed she had more availability than you." I let a beat pass, keeping my voice calm. "And what did you tell her?" "The same thing I told her last time." He chuckled. "We're happy with you. We've been happy with you from the start. Honestly, I don't know what she's trying to accomplish here, but I figured you'd want to be aware." I thanked him for the heads up, hung up, and sat there for a moment, fingers drumming lightly on the desk. There it was, her last gambit. After losing Hartwell internally after being removed from Baxter, she was still clinging to the fantasy that she could maneuver her way back into the client's favor and use that as leverage to reclaim the account. She'd even dared to approach them again after the VP's earlier intervention. This wasn't persistence, this was defiance. And defiance in a corporate ecosystem is only tolerated when it produces results. Olivia's didn't. It was time to end this for good. I didn't go to the VP right away. Timing was everything. I wanted to walk in with a package so airtight that there'd be no room for spin, no narrative for her to twist. I spent the next 2 hours assembling a very lean, very focused document. Not the exhaustive forensic timeline from before. This wasn't about overwhelming them with data. This was about showing a pattern that even a casual glance couldn't ignore. 4 bullet points. That was it. Each one clean, each one backed with a single irrefutable piece of evidence, post-Hartwell contract interference. Documented call log showing Olivia contacted the client without authorization on 2 separate occasions. Attempted Baxter account insertion. Email from Mark confirming she tried to include herself in the pitch despite not being assigned. Unauthorized use of my name. Mark's statement that she told the client I'd be attending a meeting I was never invited to. Second unsolicited Hartwell contact. Today's call with Daniel Price. Client's own words confirming her attempt to replace me. I printed the whole thing, clipped it neatly, and walked it straight into the VP's office. He was on a call but waved me in. When he hung up, I set the file on his desk. "This," I said, "is becoming a recurring issue. It's interfering with my ability to serve our clients, and it's starting to raise questions with them about how we operate. Hartwell has noticed. Baxter almost noticed. If it continues, the risk won't just be internal, it'll be reputational." The VP opened the file, flipping through slowly. His face didn't move much, but I caught the subtle tightening around his eyes. "You've spoken to Hartwell directly about this?" he asked. "Yes. Twice now they've told her they want to work with me, and twice she's ignored that." He closed the file and set it down with care. "Leave this with me, and thank you for keeping the focus on the business, Noah." The way he said it, flat, deliberate, told me the decision was already forming in his mind. The next day, the shift was obvious before lunch. HR sent out a calendar notice for a mandatory performance review with Olivia at 2:00 p.m. The VP was on the invite, compliance too, no one else. I didn't need to ask what it was about. At 2:15, I walked past the glass-walled conference room on my way to refill my water. The blinds were half closed, but I could still see her inside. She was sitting stiffly, her blazer perfectly buttoned, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. The VP was speaking, HR was taking notes. Her mouth moved, one word clearly enunciated, "no." Then she dropped her gaze to the table. I didn't linger. I didn't need to. I already knew how this would end. She didn't return to her desk until close to 4 o'clock. Her eyes were red, not swollen enough to suggest a breakdown, but unmistakably raw. She avoided everyone's gaze, even the junior analysts who once hovered around her like satellites. She packed a few personal items into her bag, a framed photo, a small potted plant, a handful of notebooks, and walked out without saying goodbye. By Friday morning, the official notice was out, effective immediately. Olivia R. is no longer employed with the company. We thank her for her contributions and wish her well in her future endeavors. It was written in the same bland, bloodless language all corporate exit memos use, but everyone knew the truth. And more importantly, everyone knew why. That evening, I attended an industry mixer. Daniel Price from Hartwell was there holding court with a small group of logistics managers. When he spotted me, his face lit up. "Noah Carter," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Heard the news about Olivia. Guess we won't have to worry about mixed messages anymore." I chuckled. "Guess not." He gave me a look, curious, slightly teasing. "You had something to do with that." I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the question hang. "Let's just say everything's on record now." His grin widened. "Fair enough." On the drive home that night, I thought about the last few weeks, how quickly 10 minutes of lateness had been turned into a weapon against me, how close she'd come to pulling me under before the truth caught up with her. Olivia had built her career on manipulation, on playing people against each other, on whispering in the right ears at the right moments. She thrived in the gray areas, the places where facts blurred and perception ruled. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd tried to use those tactics against someone who didn't operate on impulse. I'd let her talk. I'd let her move her pieces. And while she thought she was steering the game, I'd been documenting every step, every false move, every quiet breach of protocol. In the end, I didn't have to trap her. She'd walked herself straight into the net. The sweetest part, I never once had to raise my voice. The Monday after Olivia's departure was almost unsettling in its quiet. Offices like ours always hum with a certain undercurrent of drama. Rivalries, whispered alliances, the kind of gossip that moves faster than email. But that morning, it felt as if someone had turned down the volume on the entire floor. Her desk was already stripped bare. No photos, no plants, not even the little ceramic paperweight she used to tap absent-mindedly during calls. The space looked like it had been vacant for months, and yet just last week it had been the epicenter of her little sphere of influence. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. The memo had been clear, and everyone knew what it meant. Still, the glances I got that morning told me everything. Curiosity, a hint of respect, maybe even a little wariness. People weren't sure exactly what I'd done, but they knew I'd come out on top without ever throwing a public punch. That was fine with me. By mid-morning, the VP stopped by my office. He didn't usually make unscheduled visits, so I stood as he entered. "Noah," he said, closing the door behind him. "Got a minute?" "Of course." He sat down, his expression unreadable. "First, I want to thank you for how you handled everything with Olivia. You kept it professional, you kept it documented, and you kept it about the work. That's rare, and it didn't go unnoticed." I nodded, saying nothing. Compliments from him were like rare coins. You didn't cheapen them by talking over them. "We've been reviewing account assignments in light of recent changes," he continued. "I'd like you to take over 2 of Olivia's former accounts, 1 domestic, 1 international. You'll have the autonomy to manage them as you see fit, and the commissions will be significant." It was more than I'd expected, much more. "I appreciate the trust," I said carefully. "You've earned it," he said simply. "And Noah, keep running things the way you have been. Quiet, efficient, results-focused. We need more of that around here." When he left, I sat back and let the reality sink in. Not only had I defended my position, I'd expanded it. And I hadn't had to claw my way there. I'd let my work and the truth do most of the lifting. Still, I knew better than to think my work was done. In an environment like ours, power vacuums don't stay empty for long. Someone else would eventually try to fill Olivia's shoes, maybe even test me to see if I could be pushed around. So I made a decision. From that day forward, I'd operate with the same quiet vigilance that had carried me through the last few weeks. Every client interaction, every key decision, every significant piece of correspondence documented, backed up and stored where no one could alter it. Not because I expected another attack right away, but because I understood something most people don't. The best time to prepare for a war is when things are peaceful. That week, I had my first official call with the new international account I'd been assigned. It was a complex logistics contract spanning multiple regions, the kind of project Olivia would have salivated over. As I walked the client through our capabilities, I realized I wasn't just closing deals anymore. I was setting the tone for how my portfolio and my reputation would be defined going forward. Midway through the call, the client's lead coordinator said something that stuck with me. "You're straightforward, Noah. We don't get that often in this industry. Makes it easier to trust you. Straightforward, trustworthy." The exact qualities Olivia had tried to strip from me with her whispers and manipulation. I hung up that day, knowing she had failed twice, not just in removing me from Hartwell, but in tarnishing my name. If anything, she'd given me the chance to prove to exactly the right people that I was the opposite of what she claimed. The following Friday, I found myself alone in the conference room after a routine update meeting. Sunlight poured in through the glass wall, casting long shadows across the table. I thought about how many times in the past month I'd walked past this room while she sat inside working her angles, confident she'd win. I thought about the moment in part 4 when I first discovered that missing calendar entry, how it had felt like a small tear in the fabric of my career, how close she'd come to turning 10 minutes of lateness into a permanent mark against me. And then I thought about the final look she'd given me when she left tight-lipped eyes averted, knowing she'd been beaten not by force but by her own trail of lies. There was a lesson in that, one I intended to keep with me. You don't always have to swing the sword. Sometimes the most devastating victory comes from letting your opponent run headfirst into the blade they've been sharpening for you. The Monday after I locked my new client files into my cabinet, set my calendar for the next quarter, and took a long look around the office. Without Olivia, the place felt different, lighter maybe, or maybe that was just me finally able to breathe without someone quietly trying to cut me out from under my own work. I wasn't naive. I knew there would be other battles, other Olivias in different forms, but for now the battlefield was mine, and I intended to hold it. 2 weeks after Olivia's exit, the dust had settled, at least on the surface. Her desk had been reassigned to a new hire, a quiet, eager analyst named Jamie who spent most of his time buried in spreadsheets. The office rhythm had stabilized, my new accounts were running smoothly, and Hartwell was already sending me referrals for other regional players. But the thing about corporate ecosystems is this: once one predator is gone, another always emerges. Sometimes it's immediate, sometimes it takes months. In this case, it took only 14 days. Her replacement wasn't a single person, it was a pair. They were newer faces, both hired within the past year, both sharp in their own ways. Claire from business strategy and Eric from finance. On paper, their departments didn't overlap with mine much, but in practice, they touched a surprising number of the same clients, especially the big ones. At first, I thought nothing of it. They seemed professional, polite even, but little signs started stacking up. First, an email meant for me was accidentally CC'd to Claire, one containing sensitive pricing models for a client negotiation. She replied to the thread with "Thanks, I'll review and see where we can optimize margins." Not her role. Then Eric began appearing in client prep meetings he wasn't scheduled for, offering financial perspective in a way that undercut my proposals by making them sound overly generous. Individually, these things could be brushed off. Together, they felt like the opening moves of a familiar game. The first real test came during a planning meeting for a potential multi-million-dollar expansion with one of my newly inherited international accounts. The client had agreed to explore integrating a second logistics hub into their network, an idea I'd been planting seeds for since my first call with them. The meeting room was full VP at the head of the table, me on one side, Claire and Eric opposite. We were halfway through the agenda when Claire spoke up. "I've been reviewing the preliminary strategy," she said smoothly, "and I think we should consider reallocating some of the client interaction to the strategy team. It'll streamline communication and ensure alignment with our corporate growth model." It was worded carefully, no direct jab, just a process improvement suggestion, but the subtext was clear. Let's take part of Noah's role. The VP glanced at me, thoughts I smiled slightly. I'm all for alignment. That's why I've already mapped out a client-specific model that dovetails with our corporate growth plan. The client's seen it. They love it. I can circulate it after this meeting so we're all working from the same page. Claire's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. Before she could pivot, Eric chimed in. From a financial standpoint, we could probably improve margins if we reduce on-site client visits and handle more remotely. Just a thought. I kept my tone light. That's a valid perspective. Fortunately, this client has already agreed to cover travel expenses for on-site work, so it's cost neutral for us and high value for them. The VP leaned back, looking between the three of us. Sounds like Noah has this covered. After the meeting, I didn't storm back to my desk or confront them. I'd learned from Olivia that the best counter isn't a public spar, it's a quiet record. That afternoon, I created a new folder in my private archive, potential challenges, Claire and Eric. Into it went the email thread with Claire's unsolicited involvement, notes from meetings where Eric inserted himself, a bullet point recap of today's attempt to reframe my client approach. Not because I planned to use it right away, but because I'd learned this truth: the moment you start feeling a pattern, you document it. Over the next week, their moves became more subtle, but not subtle enough. Claire began CCing herself on my project updates for visibility. Eric sent me budget queries for clients that weren't under finance review. I didn't push back, yet. Instead, I let them think they were making inroads, all while reinforcing my direct relationships with the clients. One call in particular cemented my advantage. A major domestic client, one of the two accounts I'd inherited from Olivia, mentioned that Claire had reached out to introduce herself and suggest they loop her in on strategic discussions. "What did you tell her?" I asked, keeping my tone friendly. The client laughed, told her we're happy with you, didn't even write her number down. By the time Friday rolled around, I had more than enough to act if I chose to. But instead of running straight to the VP, I decided to set the stage the same way I had with Olivia, by letting them step into the open. An opportunity presented itself almost immediately. The VP scheduled a quarterly review for the following week, a meeting where account leads presented updates to leadership. Both Claire and Eric would be there. I knew exactly what would happen. One of them would try to insert themselves into my presentation. And when they did, I'd be ready not just to defend, but to demonstrate to the entire leadership team where the real expertise lay. So I prepared meticulously: client results, growth metrics, testimonials, even a live demo of the tracking integration Hartwell had praised. Every stat was airtight, every potential criticism addressed before it could be spoken. The day of the review, the room was full. The VP nodded for me to begin. I walked them through the accounts with crisp precision, highlighting wins, addressing challenges, and outlining next steps. Just as I predicted, Claire raised her hand halfway through. "Have we considered," she began, "shifting some of these strategic touch points to the strategy team? It could free up Noah to focus on." I clicked to the next slide before she could finish. It displayed a client testimonial email praising my strategic planning, specifically with a note from the client saying, "We value Noah's direct involvement in every stage." The VP raised an eyebrow. "That seems pretty clear." Eric tried next, suggesting we trim client visits to save costs. I pulled up the signed agreement showing the client was covering all travel expenses. By the end of the presentation, the room knew exactly who had control of these accounts and who didn't. Afterwards, the VP clapped me on the shoulder. "Well done. Keep running your playbook." Claire and Eric avoided my gaze as they left the room. I didn't smile, not outwardly, but inside I knew I'd just sent a message. Whatever game they thought they were starting, I'd already mastered it. The Monday after the quarterly review, the VP stopped by my office before I'd even finished my first coffee. He rarely came unannounced and never without a reason. "Got a minute?" he asked, already closing the door. I nodded. "Of course." He leaned against the edge of my desk, arms folded. "You did well in the review last week. You kept it focused and you were ready for the curveballs." "Appreciate that," I said. He studied me for a moment, then added, "I've been hearing little things from other departments. Claire and Eric have been having side conversations about account distribution, about whether certain clients might be better served if their teams were more directly involved." It wasn't news to me, but hearing it from him confirmed something important. Their whispers had reached leadership. "I'm telling you this," he continued, "because it's starting to annoy people. Nobody likes feeling like they're being lobbied against without being asked directly." "Understood," I said. The VP straightened. "I'm not going to tell you how to handle it, but if you choose to shut this down, make sure you do it in a way that leaves no doubt where the authority lies." That was as close to a green light as I was going to get. Over the next few days, I watched Claire and Eric with a kind of detached focus. They were careful now, no direct interference, no obvious seeing themselves onto my updates, but I caught the signs: a quick hallway conversation ending abruptly when I walked by a spreadsheet on Claire's screen that looked suspiciously like one of my client reports, Eric lingering outside the VP's office with a practiced, "Oh, I was just passing by" smile. They weren't retreating, they were recalibrating. Fine, so was I. The opportunity came faster than I expected. Late Thursday afternoon, I got an email from one of my international accounts, one of the big ones I'd inherited after Olivia's exit. They wanted to schedule a last-minute strategy call for Friday morning to discuss expanding into a new market. That was my opening. I sent a reply looping in the VP and marking the call as strategic planning, primary account lead Noah Carter. Then I quietly invited Claire and Eric to join, not because I needed them, but because I knew they wouldn't be able to resist trying to insert themselves. If they tried, I'd have the perfect chance to draw the line, and I'd do it with the client as an unshakable witness. Friday morning, we were on the call within seconds of the client logging in. After a warm greeting, I outlined the potential market opportunity they'd mentioned and presented a tailored proposal I drafted the night before. The client responded enthusiastically. "This is exactly the direction we've been hoping for. We've reviewed similar models from competitors, but yours is the only one that anticipates our regulatory challenges in advance." I thanked them, then opened the floor for discussion. Right on cue, Claire jumped in. "I think it might also be beneficial if the strategy team, my team, were to take over some of the client-facing planning. That way Noah could focus on execution, and we could." The client interrupted their tone, polite but firm. "With respect, Claire, we're very happy with Noah leading the planning. His understanding of our operations has been spot on from the start." Claire's mouth opened, then closed. She nodded stiffly. Eric tried a softer angle. "Perhaps finance could help identify cost-saving measures." The client chuckled. "Eric, our budgets are already approved based on Noah's recommendations. We're comfortable with them." I didn't need to say anything. They'd just been shut down by the very people they were hoping to impress. When the call ended, I stayed on for a quick debrief with the VP. He'd been silent for most of it, but now he smiled faintly. "Well, he said that was definitive." Sometimes I replied, "It's better to let the client speak for themselves." He nodded. Message received, on all fronts. By Monday, the dynamic had shifted completely. Claire stopped adding herself to my updates. Eric went back to dealing with budgets for his assigned accounts. Whatever appetite they'd had for taking pieces of my portfolio had evaporated, at least for now. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. The win was cleaner this way. In our world, nothing kills ambition faster than a public, undeniable reminder of where the real authority sits. But just in case I kept my potential challenges, Claire and Eric folder updated. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people rarely change their nature. They just wait for another opportunity. When Monday rolled around, the office felt steady. Not quiet exactly. There's no such thing in a company like ours, but steady in the way a sea feels after a storm. People were focused on their own work again. No whispered side conversations when I walked by, no sudden silences at the coffee machine. Claire was back in her strategy silo, Eric buried in his spreadsheets, and my accounts were running clean. It wasn't just the absence of interference that struck me, it was the way people had begun looking at me differently. Not with suspicion the way they had when Olivia started her campaign, but with a kind of guarded respect. They'd seen me defend my position twice now without theatrics. No shouting matches, no desperate HR accusations, just steady surgical responses. And in an environment where perception shapes reality, that kind of consistency sticks. Late Tuesday afternoon, the VP called me into his office. "Noah," he said as I stepped in close the door. I did then sat across from him. "I've been thinking about the way you've handled things these past few months," he began. "Olivia's mess, the Claire and Eric situation. You've navigated all of it without losing focus on results. Appreciate that," I said, though I could tell there was more coming. "There's a promotion coming up." He continued, "Senior Business Development Manager. It's yours if you want it. Bigger accounts, bigger budgets, more autonomy." I let a beat pass before answering. "I want it." He smiled faintly. "Good. I'll make the recommendation to HR this week." That was it. No drawn-out ceremony, no empty flattery. Just a simple acknowledgement that I'd earned my seat at a higher table. That night, I stayed late, not because I needed to, but because I wanted a moment in the quiet to take it all in. The office after hours has a different feel. The hum of the HVAC replacing the daytime chatter, the skyline glowing faintly through the glass. I thought about the chain of events that had started this whole thing. 10 minutes. That's all it had been, 10 minutes late after a night of securing a major verbal agreement. 10 minutes Olivia had tried to turn into the beginning of my professional undoing. If I'd reacted emotionally, I might have played right into her hands. If I tried to fight her openly without proof, she might have twisted the story until I was the aggressor. But I hadn't. I documented, waited, and let her leave her own fingerprints on every move. The same with Claire and Eric. There'd been no need to confront them in a hallway or fire off defensive emails. I'd simply put them in situations where their overreach was exposed naturally, with witnesses they couldn't discredit. It reminded me of something my first mentor told me years ago. The best revenge in business is to make the truth so undeniable it speaks for you. A week later, the promotion became official. My email signature changed, my portfolio expanded again, and with it came a quiet but noticeable shift in how leadership engaged with me. The VP now copied me on higher level discussions. Department heads began asking for my perspective in planning sessions. And the best part, the younger staff started coming to me not just for client-related advice, but for guidance on how to navigate the office politics without getting burned. I never told them the full Olivia story. I didn't need to. The lesson was in the way I handled it and in the fact that I was still here stronger than before. One evening, about a month after Olivia's exit, I ran into Daniel from Hartwell at another industry mixer. He clapped me on the back, still keeping everyone honest. "Noah." I smiled. "Something like that." He shook his head, amused. "Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. Your reputation's solid, not just with us, but across the board. People talk, and in this business, that's worth more than any contract." We talked shop for a while, and later as I drove home, I realized he was right. Contracts are temporary, commissions come and go. But your name, the weight it carries, the trust it earns or loses, that's the real currency. I keep that thought close now. I still document everything. I still back up my records twice. And I still make a point of letting others speak first in meetings, not because I don't have an answer, but because every word they speak without thinking is an opportunity for me to understand exactly how they play the game. Because the truth is, there will be other Olivias, other Claires, other Erics. The faces change, the tactics shift, but the game is the same, and I'll be ready. If you were in my situation, targeted over something as small as 10 minutes late, would you have fought back immediately, or would you have waited and let them bury themselves? Comment below to let us know. Thank you for following my story. If you've ever faced betrayal or difficult choices in love, share your thoughts and experiences below. Don't forget to subscribe to Ethan's Way for more stories of truth and resilience, and join the conversation.